I have not shared my story with anyone yet, because it is hard to believe, but I want to make sure the facts are known for the record. I am documenting this now to explain my situation and provide a clear account of the events that took place. If you are listening to this, please pay close attention to the details and understand that I am sharing a factual report of my experience. It was the middle of the week, and I had been working long hours for a transportation service for several days in a row. The rain was very heavy, making it difficult to see the lights on the road through the windshield. I was feeling very tired after sitting for 12 hours and planned to stop working when a high-value request came in for a pickup downtown. I considered declining it, but decided to accept because the destination was in a quiet area with no traffic, and I thought it would be a simple way to finish my shift. The person was waiting under a shelter at an old store, standing very still while it rained heavily. He wore a dark coat and did not seem to mind the weather as he stepped into the vehicle. When he sat in the back seat, I noticed a strong scent of cleaning supplies and fresh laundry. I followed my usual routine by confirming his name and destination, but he remained quiet and watched me through the mirror. His expression was very neutral, as if he were lost in thought, and he eventually gave a single nod. I began driving, trying to start a polite conversation to fill the quiet space in the car. I asked how his evening was going, but he continued to look out the window at the city lights. After a short time, he moved forward slightly so I could see him clearly and spoke in a very quiet and steady voice. He did not discuss the weather or the traffic, but instead asked if I still enjoyed the coffee from a specific shop with a blue door. His words drifted toward me slowly, quietly, like something carried on a distant wind. I felt surprised because that location is far away, and I only visited on certain mornings. I tried to make a joke about him seeing me there before, but he remained serious, still and unmoving, like a shadow watching from the edge of a field. He mentioned that I usually sit in a specific corner and suggested that I check the window latch at that location because it does not always close securely during windy weather. I felt a sense of unease that was not caused by the temperature inside the vehicle. I focused on the road and held the steering wheel firmly while trying to convince myself he was simply a regular customer from that shop. This explanation did not feel very convincing, but I wanted to remain professional while we were traveling. We were now leaving the bright city lights and driving toward a quiet industrial area where there were very few streetlights along the way. The quiet returned, but it felt much more significant and focused, as if he were waiting for me to reach a specific conclusion. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw that he was watching me closely instead of looking at his phone or the scenery outside. I checked the navigation system frequently, hoping the arrival time would decrease, but the trip to the industrial area felt longer the more we traveled. I tried to turn on the radio to create some background sound, but I stopped when he spoke again in a very clear and close voice that sounded as if he were right next to me. He requested that I take the next right turn, even though the navigation system indicated I should continue straight for several more miles. The suggested route was the fastest way, and I told him so, but he stayed firm, almost still, and said he needed to meet a friend at a facility just off the main road. I didn't argue. The surroundings were growing too quiet, so I eased on the signal and turned onto a gravel path that looked old enough to remember things best forgotten. Rain hammered the roof in heavy, rhythmic sheets as the car crept forward, and through the dark, the shape of a large building slowly emerged, rising out of the shadows as we approached the destination. We arrived at the loading dock, and I shifted the car into park, expecting to see someone waiting there in the rain. But the area was empty, completely empty, just stacks of old pallets and equipment covered in worn fabric that stirred and lifted in the wind. The passenger stayed in the back seat, silent, making no phone calls, while the engine kept humming softly in the dark. I waited for a long time, watching the minutes slip by on the dashboard clock, while he simply sat there and watched me. 10 minutes passed in complete silence, and I could hear my own heart beating very clearly over the sound of the rain. I eventually turned around to ask if his friend was arriving, but I stopped speaking when I saw his behavior. He was not looking for anyone, but was sitting perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, watching me with an intensity that made me feel very uncomfortable. He finally told me to continue driving, and his voice was completely flat, as if the last 10 minutes spent sitting in the dark parking area had not occurred at all. I put the vehicle back into gear with slightly unsteady hands, keeping my eyes on the road while noticing in the dim dashboard light that the passenger in the back seat calmly reached into his coat, took out a small package, and carefully put on a pair of blue protective gloves, adjusting them until they fit snugly. The snap of his glove echoed in the quiet car, cutting through the sound of the storm outside, drifting through the space like a distant ripple. He avoided eye contact while he carefully polished the handle he had touched upon entering, moving with a slow, deliberate calm. With a small cloth, he rubbed the surface again and again, as if erasing his presence the way a cloud softens its own edges in the sky. Then he cleared the mist from the window where he had been breathing, the motion steady, almost gentle. His intense focus on tidying the area before we spoke made me feel completely unnoticed, as though I were simply watching from afar, silent and still. I tried to focus on the navigation system, but the signal was becoming weak as the tall concrete walls of the buildings surrounded the vehicle. The air felt tight, close, as if the city itself was pressing in. I felt a sudden and intense urge to leave the moving car, but I knew I was traveling at 40 miles an hour on a wet road. Still, the feeling grew, sharp and urgent, humming beneath my skin. I reached over to the door panel, thinking I would at least unlock the doors so I could exit quickly at the next stop. My fingers pressed the switch, but there was no sound, and the locks did not move. I pressed it again, harder this time, my breath catching as worry curled through me. The control was not working, and the doors remained locked. That was when I recalled the dull noise I heard while waiting at the store, a sound I had assumed was just a trunk closing firmly. He had likely adjusted the door mechanisms from the outside before ever entering the car. I looked in the mirror, breathing quickly, and saw him watching me with a very slight, brief smile. He told me not to worry about the locks and explained that security was his main priority when traveling through areas that felt quiet and isolated. His voice stayed steady and polite, as if he were having an ordinary conversation about the weather, even though I realized the doors would not open. As we passed beneath a dim yellow light, I briefly saw his face, which showed a strong sense of focus and anticipation. And he leaned forward with a gloved hand resting on the seat near me as he quietly mentioned that I had spoken loudly on the phone earlier at the store. Then repeated details of a private conversation about my finances, even correcting a date, which made me realize he must have been nearby long before getting into the vehicle. The realization that I had been followed all day made me feel extremely cold and frightened, like a shadow brushing the back of my neck. I understood that he had been nearby during every stop, every small conversation I had since the morning, drifting just out of sight, yet always there. I began to cry quietly, and my vision blurred as I turned onto the final road shown on the navigation screen. It was a dead-end street, filled with old shipping containers and piles of metal that looked strangely twisted in the dark. There were no lights on in the buildings, and the entire area was completely silent, an emptiness stretching wide between the large warehouses, holding its breath. I searched for a safe way to stop or get attention, but the area offered no clear options. And meanwhile, the passenger leaned back calmly with his hands folded, saying I was doing well and would leave a positive review for my cooperation, a remark that felt unsettling and purposeful. And moments later, the navigation system announced we had arrived even though the destination was nothing more than a dark, empty stretch of pavement. I slowed the vehicle considerably and felt a tightening in my chest as the headlights reached the far end of the lot, revealing another vehicle parked in the shadows, an old white van without markings, and beside it stood a tall, broad figure in a dark coat similar to my passengers, waiting quietly as they began to unroll a large sheet of clear plastic, its dry rustling sound carrying through the glass and reinforcing the sense that the journey had come to a serious and uncertain end. The silence in the car became very heavy, and it felt difficult to breathe until I started to feel lightheaded. The air itself seemed to press inward, slow and thick. I kept hoping a patrol vehicle or even a security guard would pass by, but we were now in a part of the district that was neglected and poorly maintained. The streets stretched out empty, like forgotten paths. The passenger noticed me looking at the vacant sidewalks and mentioned that no one visits this area late at night because the security contracts for these lots ended months ago. He spoke with a sense of authority, calm and certain, as if he were describing his own property, and in that moment I realized he had chosen this specific location for a reason. I looked down at the phone on my dashboard, hoping to call for help, but the screen showed there was no signal at all. The navigation map had shifted into a blank grid, and the marker for my vehicle sat in an empty stretch with no recorded roads anywhere. The passenger moved closer, gripping the back of my seat firmly, the material letting out a sharp sound, and then he said that technology is very delicate and that people depend on it far too much for their safety when they find themselves in isolated places. I tried to keep the vehicle moving, thinking that as long as I was still in motion, I had some control. But the path ended at a large metal gate, and as I stared at it, my thoughts raced while my body felt heavy with tension. Then the passenger reached forward and calmly turned off the engine, and the sudden silence left only the soft tapping of rain on the roof and the steady sound of his breathing. He stayed seated and did not move as the figure from the white van approached slowly through the puddles, each step careful and steady, while I kept trying the door handle, but it would not open and only made a dull clicking sound. And from the back seat, he spoke calmly and clearly, saying that the task was now complete and that I had followed every instruction exactly as given throughout the evening. Standing outside, the person was briefly visible by the light coming from the dashboard, appearing and disappearing like a figure caught in a passing glow. They seemed composed and methodical, moving with the quiet certainty of someone focused on a routine task rather than reacting emotionally. I tried to shift as far away from the window as the cramped space allowed, pressing myself into the opposite side of the car, feeling the space tighten around me like a narrowing path. A second person inside leaned forward from the passenger side, moving carefully over the seat with the same deliberate calm. Speaking in a controlled, steady tone, they asked me to stay still so that everything could be kept orderly, each moment handled without disruption in what came next. An outside attendant signaled by tapping a tool on the glass, and I called out for help, though the large room stayed quiet, while my calm partner advised me to save my energy and stay professional as we finished our meeting. An external technician began to draw a thick protective layer across the top of the vehicle, aided by a second worker who had arrived to help with the process. The dense fabric turned the windows into a soft gray screen, dimming the natural light and creating a quiet, private atmosphere inside the cabin. It became clear that the objective was to utilize the car as a dedicated, self-contained workspace rather than moving to a different location. The sound of the material being firmly cinched and tucked around the lower frame was continuous and audible, ensuring the interior was fully partitioned from the rest of the facility as they finalized the setup. Arthur took a small recording tool from his pocket and turned it on, which made a quiet beep. He spoke into it in a steady voice, noting the time, the surroundings, and my current condition by checking my pulse. He talked about my past actions and reviewed my performance during the trip. mentioning that my quiet behavior earlier made me a good fit for their study. I realized then that this was not an accident, but that I was a planned participant in a very organized and long-term project that had started long before I met him. The individual outside finished securing the protective layer and stepped back, their silhouette showing as a large, dark figure in the van's light. Arthur leaned back into his seat, looking satisfied with the progress, and mentioned that the most important part of the session was the moment of understanding. He asked if I recalled a passenger from 3 nights ago, a person who had left an umbrella in the car, and I felt a wave of concern, because that item was still with me. He explained that the umbrella contained a small tracking device that had been monitoring my location and recording audio from the moment it was left behind. I noticed the umbrella under the seat and suddenly felt uneasy as I realized everything I had said privately and every moment alone had been recorded. Arthur said they now understood me better than I understood myself, and that tonight's data would be their most complete set yet. Then he calmly thanked me for my role in their project. A bright light flashed at the edge of the lot, followed by an engine starting, and the man by the van turned toward fast-approaching headlights. Arthur suddenly panicked and ordered an immediate stop, while the person outside quickly tore the plastic and tape away from my window. During the chaos, the car's locking mechanism suddenly engaged and disengaged repeatedly, as if the approaching vehicle were emitting some form of electronic interference. I seized the opportunity immediately and shoved my shoulder against the door with all my strength, forcing it open and causing the man outside to lose his footing in the mud. Without pausing to look at the passenger, the van, or the oncoming headlights, I fled into the darkness, my shoes struggling for grip on the slick surface as I disappeared between 2 large shipping containers. I continued to run until breathing became painful, navigating the maze of old metal by feel alone until I finally reached the outer fence of the property. I stayed hidden in a drainage pipe until morning, then made my way to the road and got help from a passing driver who was worried about my condition. I reported everything to the authorities, but a later search found no van, no equipment, and no car, and the rideshare records showed my trip had already ended earlier due to a system failure. I am currently remaining inside my home, with the entrance heavily reinforced and the windows obscured by thick material to prevent anyone from looking inside. And while the authorities dismissed the event as a possible prank or a simple misunderstanding, they are unable to account for the fact that my vehicle was located several days later in a distant state, having been reduced to a compact cube at a salvage yard. Sleep remains elusive, drifting just out of reach, as the memory of the specific sound of tight gloves being pulled onto hands returns to me whenever I close my eyes. But the most distressing aspect is not the recollection of the facility or the enclosure. It's what I found earlier today, a small imprint from a gloved hand resting on the surface of my bathroom mirror, appearing exactly where the condensation from the hot water had begun to fade. I am ending this message now because a white van is stopped at the end of the street with its headlights off, and I am concerned I may be being watched after sharing my account. If this is ever reviewed, I suggest looking into a coffee shop on 4th Street and a person who spends time there without ordering, and I can hear someone approaching the stairs outside my door. I should have verified the security settings on the rear doors before beginning my work. It seems the passenger was correct about my lack of awareness regarding my surroundings. The handle to my door is moving now, and I can hear the distinct brittle sound of plastic sheeting being prepared in the corridor. I am deactivating this device, but to whoever recovers this, avoid the industrial area at night. The organization remains active, and they are constantly seeking new subjects for their research.